It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You could find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting just by emailing me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Really excited about today's show. I had this guest booked about a year ago, but somehow I dropped the ball. I don't know what I did. I never got back to her. Cerise Castle, Cerise Castle. And you could find her at cerisecastle.me. You can also find her. She has a podcast called A Tradition of Violence that you can check out on all podcast platforms. She also writes for Capital and Maine. She's on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, all those kind of places there too. You can find her. Her Instagram is kind of interesting. It's Your Majesty, YOURMAJESTCEE for Cerise Castle. Cerise Castle, are you there?
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Before we get into all this business about this corrupt sheriff's department, tell us about yourself. Who is Cerise Castle?
So Cerise Castle, I am a reporter based in Los Angeles. I write about a lot of different things. You mentioned my inequality reporting for Capital and Maine. I also do arts and culture, human interest stories, and investigative reporting. What most people know me for is my investigations into the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department's deputy gangs. Now, when I say deputy gangs, a lot of people don't necessarily know what that means. People are familiar with street gangs, things like the Bloods, the Crips. Deputy gangs are really the exact same thing, except they are formed within the Sheriff's Department. Their membership consists of sworn personnel within the Sheriff's Department. And just like street gangs, they participate in things like theft, assault, even murder. The only difference is they are shielded by the protections and authorizations that we give to sworn police officers, and they are committing these crimes in the course of their duty.
Now, are these competitive gangs? These are gangs competing against each other along racial lines as the street gangs usually are?
The Sheriff's Department's deputy gangs, as I have been able to uncover in my research, date back to the 1960s. And at that point, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department was a lot less diverse than the department we know today. It was primarily white men. And yes, a lot of this stuff was along racial lines. You could see that most of the gangs were made up of white men. Some of them were even aligned to overtly white supremacist principles, things like the Vikings deputy gang, which was found to be a neo-Nazi white supremacist gang by a federal court judge. But that has shifted over the years as the department has become more diverse and membership in these gangs has changed. Most of the members of the Sheriff's Department today are Latino men. However, that doesn't mean that those white supremacist underpinnings for the deputy gangs has changed. I would say, in fact, they're probably just as strong and aligned with those ideals as they were in the 1960s. One does not have to be white to subscribe to white supremacist ideology.
Mm-hmm. Now, are these gangs affiliated with civilian gangs as well, like the Hells Angels or something like that?
Not to my knowledge are these deputy gangs affiliated with gangs that we know from the street. But I have heard stories about deputy gangs partnering with members of street gangs. However, that isn't anything that I have been able to confirm. That's more anecdotes and stories that I've picked up just in the course of my reporting.
Now, how did you discover all this?
So I got into reporting on deputy gangs. It really goes back to my childhood. I grew up in the greater LA area, and I can remember from the time I was very young having other kids on the playground, my older brother, teachers even warning me about deputy gangs, saying to stay away from white deputies that have shaved heads, for example, because they were probably members of the Vikings. And this was the early 1990s, the DARE era, so it was very common for us to have these deputies coming into our schools and talking to us, warning us about the dangers of street gangs. And as we grew up, these same deputies were going after kids that I went to school with just for the virtue of living where they lived, being friends with who they were friends with, and saying they were gang members. And it never really made sense to me that trusted adults were telling me that these deputies were, in fact, members of a gang, and the deputies were turning around and telling us kids that gangs were wrong and even criminalizing some of us kids for being alleged gang members. It just never made sense to me. So if you fast forward to 2020, I was reporting on the uprisings that were happening in response to the murder of George Floyd. And in the course of that reporting, I was actually shot with a less lethal munition that put me on bed rest for a number of months. And I was really not content to sit back and be on bed rest as the doctor instructed. I really felt it was important, as the only Black reporter in the newsroom that I worked in at the time, to be contributing to this major moment in history. So I can recall very vividly sitting back on my couch watching local news, sort of fighting FOMO that I had for not being able to be out reporting on the protests. And I saw a report from a friend of mine, Kate Cagle, who is a anchor at Spectrum News 1, and she had got her hands on some deposition testimony where a deputy who worked at the Compton station was really revealing that two deputies who had killed a teenager just a few days after George Floyd was murdered had been members of the deputy gang, and that he suspected that that the killing had been done in order for them to become full-fledged members of this deputy gang. When I saw that report, it really reawakened these questions that I had been living with for the past 20-some years about deputy gangs. And I decided at that point that it would be, within doctor's orders for me to investigate the deputy gangs from my couch. I had also just taken a investigative course on public records from the Ida B. Wells Society, so I felt I had the proper tools in my toolbox to carry out an investigation like that. And I began sending out public records requests.
When you were shot, do you think that you were targeted for that? For your inequality reporting, that kind of thing?
Well, at that point, I was really just a, general assignment reporter at a local NPR affiliate. But I do think I was targeted because I was a member of the press. When the shooting happened, I was carrying a camera. I was carrying an audio recorder, as this was a local NPR affiliate that I worked for, and I needed to get sound from people and sound from the protests. And most importantly, I had a press badge on. Mm-hmm. And when the police arrived at the area that I was in and formed a line across the intersection and began walking towards the crowd, firing pretty indiscriminately, I held up my press badge above my head and began walking toward them, because the training at that point for reporters was to get behind the line, make yourself known to the highest person in command, and get behind the line. And as I was attempting to do that, I actually captured this on camera, in the camera I was holding in my other hand. The police officer who shot me, he turns, looks at me, and then pulls the trigger. So yes, I do believe I was targeted as a member of the press. There were several other reporters that identified themselves as press and were shot, not just in Los Angeles, but across the United States when it came to covering the George Floyd protests.
It's just amazing. Then you got that kid, Kyle Rittenhouse, can be carrying a rifle and walk toward the cops, surrendering themselves, and they just wave them on. Yeah, go ahead. Just incredible. So when you learn to do all this work with the public records research and the FOIA requests and stuff, what did you uncover?
So my first initial request was for a list that the county board of supervisors had instructed the county council to make about any case that related to deputy gangs. I found out that list existed by going back through meeting after meeting of the board of supervisors and looking for anything about deputy gangs, because I just did not believe that this issue could have been present within the county for the past 60 years and they knew nothing about it. And I was quite lucky to find within a meeting at that point, it was only 1 year past from when I was looking, where the county board of supervisors did say, yes, we want to have a list prepared of all litigation related to these deputy gangs. I put in that request in August. I received the response with the full list. It was about 65 cases related to deputy gangs at that point, dating back to the 1980s. And I used that really as a roadmap to find other cases where deputy gangs had been implicated and to find members of deputy gangs, get their names, learn more about them, their background, that sort of thing.
Have you come across any whistleblowers working within the sheriff's department that have come and fed you information?
Absolutely, yes. I would say that people within the department that are willing to speak candidly about the deputy gangs and how influential the deputy gangs are on the entire operation of the department are really the cornerstone of this reporting. Deputy gangs are really secretive societies, and they aren't really, sending out press releases or promoting what they're doing in any sort of way. So it's really up to people within the department to come forward and to speak about this stuff in order to make the public aware.
Now, can you give us some examples of some of the atrocities these gangs are committing?
Absolutely. These deputy gangs they metastasize and they grow, which is really one of the main issues here. And you can look at that by seeing how they form and conduct themselves. For example, most of these the deadliest deputy gangs, I will say, are operating within the LA County jail system.
Right.
And I say that they're the deadliest because there really isn't a lot of oversight for what happens within the jails. These are closed facilities where the public is not allowed in, where oversight officials need to give notice that they're coming, which allows the deputies to sort of clean up any bad stuff that's going on ahead of any visit. And abuse is rampant as a result of that. When deputies complete their time in the academy, their first assignment is in the jails, and they are being taught day one to abuse people and how to get away with it. And we see that being translated onto the streets when they are coming out of these jail facilities and employing the same tactics that they've used on incarcerated people on the streets.
Yeah, and the corruption inside the prison system is the cell phones and the drugs and the contraband, all this kind of stuff is rampant.
Absolutely, yes. I recently had a story about a deputy who was caught smuggling drugs into a jail facility where I had also reported on the existence of a white supremacist deputy gang. So yes, these things really do go hand in hand. If I can just give you a quick example.
Yeah.
Samuel Aldama. Now, this is one of the deputies that I mentioned earlier who killed a teenager just a few days after George Floyd. Now, he worked inside of Men's Central Jail here in Los Angeles and was caught beating an incarcerated man in December of 2011. Aldama goes on to beat and falsely imprison another young man once he has graduated out to patrol in Compton in January of 2016. And then Aldama goes on to shoot and kill another man in Compton in August of 2016. Now, that for me is just, a clear-cut example of how being trained in these deputy gang tactics translates into real harm and real death.
Now, do they have like gang tattoos and stuff like that to identify themselves?
Absolutely. In California, the penal code defines gangs as any group of 3 or more people that have a common name, identifying sign or symbol, has as one of its primary activities the commission of about 26 criminal offenses that are commonly referred to as the Dirty 26 by California prosecutors. And finally, members have engaged in a, quote, pattern of criminal gang activity, either alone or together. Sheriff's Department deputy gangs fit this description completely. They have hand signs for their gangs. They have tattoos. They even sell paraphernalia related to their gang membership. They are engaged in things like theft, assault, and murder. And all of this is done in the course of furthering the gang's reputation, and they are doing this either on their own or in concert with one another. So yes, these are 100% gangs as defined by the California Penal Code.
Well, does the Sheriff's Department have a restriction in their policies against their employees being part of a club or a group? Do they have any kind of restriction against that, at least?
So this is actually another thing that I recently had a story on. In California, in 2020, we passed a law that required all police and sheriff's departments to have policies forbidding their sworn personnel from participating within gangs formed specifically within the department. The sheriff's department has been in clear violation of that law for over a year now. They have not come up with a policy that addresses those requirements that have been put forward by the legislature and that are now part of the penal code. They have not faced any sort of discipline or any sort of infraction for openly violating California law.
So the Sheriff's Department is doing nothing to regulate this?
That is correct.
What about outside agencies, the federal government?
The federal government has allegedly been investigating deputy gangs since 2019. We have not heard any updates on that investigation for the past 5 years. The State Department of Justice did launch an investigation into deputy gangs. However, they have gone back on a promise that was made when that investigation was launched to make their findings public. Our Attorney General, Rob Bonta, has backtracked and said that he will not be making that report public, despite the fact that his predecessor, Javier Becerra, promised that it would be made public. So the people of Los Angeles will not know what the Department of Justice found, what they are doing about it, which doesn't really bode well for confidence in the Sheriff's Department or confidence around transparency.
Right, and people should understand, too, this also means that they're going to be looking the other way when they're enforcing the law in the streets, too, for their friends and comrades in this kind of activity. Now, what about when you're looking up all these lists and stuff like that? You were doing the FOIA requests. What about the sheriffs who have been arrested for drug dealing and stuff like that, or batteries inside the prison? Anything like that?
So it's a little difficult to find stuff like that specifically. We do have a law in California, commonly referred to as SB 1420 or SB 1421, which made public all records of any time a police officer or sheriff's deputy fires a gun, anytime they have been found to have committed excessive force, anytime they have been found to have been dishonest, or anytime they have been found to have committed a sexual assault. However, there are a lot of loopholes in that. So we don't know, for example, when the department has investigated someone for being a member of a deputy gang, that is not public. If someone is being investigated for dealing drugs, as you said, that's something that wouldn't be public. We would only find out about it if charges were brought. And when we're looking at when district attorneys decide to bring charges against sworn officers, it's very rare. Yeah. So I'm sure that there are instances where stuff like that is happening that the public does not know about, and at this point, will never know about.
So there's no public access for the average citizen to find out how many regulations in the police department are being violated. That
is correct.
Okay. But what about now over there? Do you have like because like in New York, you have the PBA, the Patrons Benevolent Society, this big, powerful union. Do you have like a big, powerful union over there for the sheriffs?
Absolutely. It is called ALAD, the Association for Los Angeles Deputy Sheriffs, and they are an extremely powerful union, yes.
Now, what about, once again, I'm originally from New York. I spent 20 years in Nevada, too, and the police over there are a whole other... Forget it over there, too, man. But what about, like, if there is a shooting or one of these cops commits a crime and they get pulled off duty, what's the procedure there?
For when a police officer is pulled off duty?
Yeah, like in New York, they're appointed a lawyer right away. They don't have to be questioned right away. They're given time to speak to their lawyer before they question. Do you have that kind of stuff?
Oh, yes, absolutely. The Police Officer Bill of Rights, we have a version of that here in California, and there's a version of that law in all 50 states within this country. And yes, as you said, that makes the rest of us second-class citizens when it comes to the criminal justice system. Yes, all sworn police officers are guaranteed the right to a union representative, to a lawyer, the right to review all evidence against them before they have to answer questions. They are only to be questioned about any suspicions of criminal activity on the clock. So they're getting paid while they are being questioned for any potential crimes that they may have committed. Yes, if that was available to the general public, I think the criminal justice system would look a lot different. However, those are only luxuries that are afforded to sworn police officers.
If you want to go into a life of crime, this would be the occupation to get. You know what I mean? Because you get a license to do whatever you want.
Absolutely.
Okay, now tell this Saldano. This is the shooting of the 14-year-old or the disappearance of a 14-year-old. What's going on with that?
Yeah, so this story is very mysterious and very intriguing. In March of this year, Francisco Nunez, who was a 38-year-old father of 8, was last seen alive in the city of Lancaster in northern Los Angeles County. He was seen by about a dozen people in the custody of Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies. He wasn't heard from again for 5 days. His family could not locate him. On the 5th day, his body was discovered just a few feet away from where he was last seen alive in the custody of those deputies. The Sheriff's Department has not acknowledged, will not admit that Nunez was in fact taken into custody. They've said that the testimony of these eyewitnesses are, quote, factually untrue and not consistent with the facts and evidence. How it's very hard for me to believe that. I've interviewed at least 8 of those 12 individually, and their stories all match up. The Sheriff's Department also has not been able to provide surveillance video of the scene, which would confirm whether or not Francisco was taken into custody. They've said that footage was corrupted, which, to me is very suspicious. So the way the 14-year-old ties in is the 14-year-old was one of those eyewitnesses who saw Francisco, was one of the last people to see Francisco alive. I spoke to this witness in May of this year in East Los Angeles. We did an interview about what he saw. And just this past week, he was shot by sheriff's deputies in the East Los Angeles area.
Okay, and there's a GoFundMe associated with that as well for this 14-year-old kid, Jonathan. Just go to GoFundMe and look up Help Desiree Overcome Crisis and Care for Jonathan. Or if you could, Desiree Santillano? How do you pronounce it?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Close enough. Santillano. Now, before, you said you interviewed about 8 witnesses who saw this gentleman being taken into custody by the sheriff's department. Did any of those 8 witnesses recognize one of these cops as someone they dealt with before or knew their name or something?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay, then what about the FOIA on their body cam?
Yes, I was able to obtain body cam footage. However, the sheriff's department did not turn over all of the body camera footage that was requested.
Gotcha. So then do you have the resources to file an additional lawsuit to obtain that body cam footage?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And that's something that we are pursuing.
Do we know why this fellow came into contact with the sheriff's department on that day in the first place?
Yes. So the sheriff's department said that they were conducting an investigation for a stolen vehicle, which is why they initially made contact with Francisco and his friends. The issue with that is the stolen vehicle in question belongs to one of the men that was stopped and questioned as a suspect for theft. I do not understand how someone could be a suspect of stealing something that they own, but that is the sheriff's department's version.
Okay, and then his body was discovered 5 days later at the same location.
Just a few feet away from where they initially made contact, yes.
And then what was the cause of death?
The cause of death?
Yeah.
The sheriff's department says that Francisco died of the effects of methamphetamine. However, the autopsy report does not take into account bruising that was present throughout his torso, legs, and arms, as well as several burn marks that appear to be made by a taser that were also found present throughout his body. And finally, a cut that appears to have been made by handcuffs that was present on both of his wrists.
Okay, so there's indications of that he was handcuffed, and that shows up 5 days later. So this is some pretty serious handcuffing there. Oh, boy. Okay, now what is the reason why they shot this 14-year-old Jonathan?
So the sheriff's department says that Jonathan was the passenger in a stolen vehicle. That was why they initially made contact. They say that they began pursuing this stolen vehicle. It came to a stop. 2 people got out of the car. One of the passengers was apprehended without incident, and as they were breaking down the containment zone that they had set up to try to find the driver and passenger of the car, they spotted Jonathan. In their version of events, at this point, they, quote, contacted Jonathan. I do not know what that contact looks like. They have not provided me any additional narrative on that, but I do know that the contact resulted in this 14-year-old child being shot in the chest and in the leg.
Yeah, when you go to the GoFundMe, Help Desiree Overcome Crisis and Care for Jonathan, there's a picture of him in a hospital bed. How's the kid doing now?
He's improving, which I'm really happy to report. He was in stable but critical condition. He's just had his breathing tube removed, which is great progress, and we're all hoping that he pulls through.
Yeah. Now, was it public knowledge that he was a witness to this other incident with Francisco?
I did not identify him in my reporting. There was a lot of concern around the witness's safety. several witnesses have been consistently harassed by the sheriffs since this event. So myself and my editor opted to not identify people by name because of those concerns.
Yeah, the witness in the Eric Garner case did wind up doing a year in jail for some old charge. Now, what about Francisco? Is there a reason why he would be a target of the police?
Well, Francisco was, a known member of a street gang in the Lancaster area, and the sheriff's deputies were very familiar with who he was, and they did not have a good relationship.
Gotcha. So it's rival gang activity.
One might think that.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Well, it's a possibility. Okay. Considering the circumstances here. Now, what about, are you concerned now? If they're starting to shoot 14-year-old kids, what about Cerise Castle, man? Are you concerned for your safety now?
Well, I've received numerous death threats over the past 4 years as a result of this reporting. Some of them have been tied back to members of the sheriff's department. I don't really have any fear about it. No, I just sort of look at it as one of the negative parts that comes with this job, but the positives certainly outweigh it. Being able to get this information out to the people to make them aware of what's going on within the sheriff's department, and therefore hopefully empowering them to make informed decisions about who is running the sheriff's department, policies that govern the sheriff's department, elected officials that are responsible for enacting laws and crafting those policies that govern the sheriff's department and other police departments. It certainly makes it all very worthwhile.
Is there any investigation or civil lawsuit into the death of Francisco and the shooting of this young Jonathan, 14-year-old boy?
There is a claim that has been filed on Francisco's behalf. Yes, looking to find out more about the cause of death and naming the sheriff's department as responsible for his death. As far as Jonathan, it's something that is still being explored at this point.
Is Jonathan facing charges?
I do not know at this point. The sheriff's department did not answer that question.
You know, it's amazing. So many people who wind up dead from cops, there would have been no charges, okay? There would have been no charges had they not been shot and killed. There would have been nothing they could have been charged with. I do a lot of shows like this. Now, we're talking to Cerise Castle. You can find her at cerisecastle.me, Cerise. She's got a podcast called A Tradition of Violence, and you can read her articles at Capitol in Maine. And you really need to get out here and support this woman because she needs a lot of light shined on her to avoid winding up like these kids here. What else are you working on these days?
Well, I'm continuing to work on my investigations of the Sheriff's Department deputy gangs. I have a story that is going to be upcoming with the Los Angeles Public Press concerning the Sheriff's Department surveillance of me. I was able to obtain about 800 pages of emails that were generated within the department of them discussing me, giving instructions to surveil not just me, but people they believe to be connected to me. And just as a consequence of being a journalist, doing my job.
Okay, how did you find out you were under surveillance?
I filed a public records request looking for all the communications that they had regarding me. They did not want to give it to me. It took about 3 years. I had to sue them in LA Superior Court, but I won that lawsuit, received the records for the calendar year, or really not even the calendar year, for 7 months of 2021. And it was over 800 pages. And that story is upcoming soon with Los Angeles Public Press. And I think it's a fantastic example of the consequences that journalists have to face for doing their jobs.
Now, was there a pretense, any kind of pretense that they were investigating you for some kind of crime or anything improper?
The only pretense that they have is that I am a journalist writing about the Sheriff's Department.
And that's not a violation of policy?
It is not, no.
You can't sue for that?
I've met with a few attorneys that told me that unfortunately I don't really have a legal course of action here because the sheriff's department is allowed to gather information about people as part of the course of their investigations. And there really isn't a mechanism that determines whether or not those investigations are legitimate.
Incredible. And this is just outrageous, man. People really need to get behind this woman, Cerise Castle, CeriseCastle.me, and this podcast of traditional violence in the capital in Maine, and really shed some support here. Now, what about, I'm sure you're in touch with other reporters and other activists and stuff like that, or any of them are being targeted for this kind of surveillance and stuff?
Well, in these emails, I did find that there were a few activists that were mentioned by name under the suspicion of being connected to me, and that connection to me then resulted in these activists being surveilled.
And what is the nature of the surveillance? They're following you? They're tapping your phones? What are they doing?
It's unclear how deep it goes, but I have been able to confirm that they monitor everything that I post on social media.
Right.
I've also seen them sharing personal photos of mine amongst themselves. When it comes to people that they suspect to be connected to me, I have seen them sharing these people's personal phone numbers, addresses, as well as that information related to those people's family members, parents, sisters, brothers, aunts, uncles.
Yeah, and you know, every name they come up with, they're running for warrants and stuff like that. We had activists, what is George Floyd stuff back in Vegas, who after protests were followed to their cars. The cops took their plate numbers down, and then they went to their houses with year-old warrants to arrest these people. Just outrageous. Are you getting any support from the community, from anyone? Your senator, your congressman, the House of Representatives?
Yes, I've received a lot of support from the community. I've received support from some local elected officials as well, yes. Maxine Waters has been really, leading the forefront on the federal level, calling on the Department of Justice to do more when it comes to this issue. She sent several letters demanding investigations into this. And, yeah, we're really grateful for her attention on this issue. Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, what about this cop Saldano? Is he still on the force? Any kind of discipline for him?
Not that we know of, no. And yes, does still appear to be working there.
And how many deaths is this guy responsible for?
At least 2.
And within what period of time?
Within just a few months.
Incredible.
And he's not the only one like that. I will say that I did some reporting last year with help from USC Center for Health Journalism, looking at shootings and logging every shooting that had been committed by the sheriff's department dating back to the 1970s. And I found in looking at that data that, first of all, deputies that shoot someone are 3 times as likely to go on to shoot again. And that members of these deputy gangs that are committing shootings almost always go on to shoot somebody else.
Yeah, we had a cop in Vegas shot 3 people in a very short period of time. No consequences whatsoever. Now, what about some of these other crimes, like the drug dealing and stuff like that? Are there ever any high-profile arrests of these deputy gang members?
I wouldn't say high-profile, no. For whatever reason, there just seems to be a few reporters at small nonprofit outlets, for the most part, that are reporting on this stuff. And this isn't really stuff that is picked up by the legacy media outlets here in Los Angeles or nationally. As I mentioned, I broke a story about a deputy being arrested for smuggling drugs into the Los Angeles County jail system. And that stayed, really with my reporting. That wasn't picked up anywhere. And that's unfortunate because that is a story that the public should be aware of.
Yeah. Do you have any other examples of this outrageous conduct?
One more time?
Do you have any other examples of this outrageous conduct that they're doing?
Oh, my goodness. I mean, there's so many examples. One story that's coming to mind is the story of a deputy who pulled over a guy who was coming home from a casino and stole $3,000 of chips from this gentleman and did not face any consequences for it. The district attorney opted not to prosecute this deputy, and in their finding of why they said they wouldn't prosecute, they said it was because the witness told them that he was so afraid of retribution from the deputy gang, the Banditos, that he did not want to move forward with it, which to me is ridiculous for several reasons. If a witness is afraid of being, retaliated against by a gang, that seems to me as a district attorney, that would be exactly the kind of case that you would want to prosecute.
But then again, what kind of protection can you get for this witness? More cops? You know what I mean? What are you going to do? How are you going to protect this guy?
Well, I think that's up to the district attorney to figure out. This is an ongoing problem. It's been ongoing for the past 60 years. It's horrifying to me that within 60 years, we haven't been able to come up with a solution, that there does not seem to be political will to come up with a solution. Just because, you might not be able to provide adequate protections of this gentleman doesn't mean that the crime shouldn't be prosecuted. We're not having these conversations about, everyday people that are accused of crimes. If I was accused of stealing $3,000 from, a gentleman in a car, and he said that, he was afraid of retribution from my newsroom, that they might write an unflattering article about him, I doubt that the district attorney wouldn't prosecute.
You know what the thing is, too, though, man? These politicians and even district attorneys, when you go up against the cops, you're going to get pulled over. They're going to hang you up on a DUI sooner or later. You know what I mean? Or press happens all the time, Hey, so you mentioned the Banditos, you mentioned the Vikings. What other groups are there within the department there?
Well, we know of at least 25, and I'm sure that there are more. It's been told to me by members of the department that there is at least one deputy gang operating at every station, sometimes more than one.
Wait, but you said overall there's about 25 of these gangs?
That we know of, yeah.
Oh, man. So when you get these whistleblowers come forward, what kind of information are they giving you?
Generally speaking, the information that they have pertains to potential crimes that the deputy gangs have been committing. Also pertains to different killings that have happened over the years, as well as impropriety just within operation of the sheriff's department that looks like passing people over for promotions that may be whistleblowers that may have reported somebody for misconduct.
Gotcha. Boy, we're talking to Cerise Castle here. You could find her once again at Capital in Maine, where she's the inequality writer. You can find her at her podcast, Tradition. What's your Tradition of Violence? What's your podcast like?
Yeah, my podcast is really an oral history of deputy gangs. It builds on the 15-part series, A Tradition of Violence, that was published in 2021, and continues that reporting and investigation. You can hear firsthand from these deputies that we've been discussing that are whistleblowers. You can hear from the victims of violence and assault, as well as the family members of people that have been killed by deputy gang members.
And you described yourself as an inequality reporter. What was that again?
Yes, I am the Inequality in California reporter at Capital in Maine. Inequality in California.
Okay, and then what kind of reporting is that?
So there's a lot of inequality in California. We're home to the largest population of unhoused people within the country. We are, we're facing a lot of, challenges when it comes to education. That looks like challenges to the rights of trans students, challenges to the rights of gay and non-binary students. We, have many different issues when it comes to oil well drilling in neighborhoods with high rates of poverty, neighborhoods with high populations of historically marginalized groups. We have issues when it comes to rights of farm workers in the Central Valley that are responsible for providing the produce to the nation. There's a lot of inequality here in California, and it is my job as the inequality reporter to cover all of it.
Well, you'll never be out of work, okay, in America. It would appear that in the United States of America in 2024, all reporting is inequality reporting. It's like nothing else.
I would agree with that, yes.
It's not funny, man. It's heartbreaking. We'd be crying if we weren't laughing. But what about the housing crisis and the homeless crisis in California? What can you tell us about that, especially now what the Supreme Court says it's okay to arrest people?
Yeah, it's horrifying. You know, one thing that I learned recently on a story that's upcoming is that senior citizens are the fastest growing group of unhoused people in California. And that's a really frightening statistic because these are people that are on fixed incomes. These are people that, you know, may be struggling with different issues related to their physical health. And them being put out on the street is horrific, you know, for their longevity, for their health, for their mental health. It's a really frightening time.
Yeah, it really is. I tell you, at least in California, you know, you got Medicaid, you got Medicare, you got food stamps, you have assistance, man. Like I'm down in Florida now. There's nothing for people down here. And like you said, you know, when you look at these people on Facebook, these Facebook groups, everyone trying to rent a room, you know, for $600 a month. Can I get a room? You know, otherwise I'll be home. So much homeless. Forget it. So there's no sources down here. At least in California, you guys got some resources to land back on over there.
We do have some resources, yes.
But not enough.
But I would say that, you know, we could be doing a lot more. You know, for example, you know, during the COVID-19 lockdown, the federal government offered, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars to house people in hotels. And that was a program that our local government opted not to enroll in. We have a huge vacancy rate here in Los Angeles County, and nothing is being done about renter protections and ensuring that these evictions of seniors, one, aren't happening, and two, aren't, you know, making use of those vacancies to get people off the street and into housing. There's certainly a lot more that can be done, and that comes with, you know, opting to prioritize the well-being of residents instead of developers.
Wait, so you're saying in Los Angeles County there's no rent control?
We do have rent control in Los Angeles County. However, there are lots of ways for landlords to get around that.
Yeah, that's only going to get worse, too. Okay, we've been talking to Cerise Castle. You can find her at cerisecastle.me. She's got a podcast called A Tradition of Violence, and you can find her. She's the Inequality in California reporter for Capital and Maine. Cerise, what would you like to leave us with? We got about a minute left.
I would like to leave you with this. It's important to stay up to date on the news. You know, videos on social media are great, but please make sure that you are reading articles. And remember to vote local in November.
You know, that's another thing that's so true. People getting this nonsense news from TikTok and stuff, guys. Really, we gotta, if we want to make some kind of changes in this world, we got to take a little self-accountability here, take some responsibility here, get off your asses and get out there and do something. And this kid here, I want everybody to go to this GoFundMe, Help Desiree Overcome Crisis and Care for Johnny. Just take a look at this little kid that they shot sitting in this hospital bed over here. That's no joke. So once again, thank you, Cerise Castle, cerisecastle.me, A Tradition of Violence podcast, and the Inequality in California reporter for Capital and Maine. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, good night.
Good night.